Imagine a city where the only sound is the ringing of a handbell, and the only thing being sold is a coffin. In 1665, London didn't just get sick, it stopped breathing. This is a story of 100,000 deaths, massive mass graves dug by torchlight, families locked inside their own homes to die in the dark, and a wall of fire that eventually swallowed it all. Today, we are going to reconstruct the most terrifying year in the history of the world. We will address the biological mystery that no one at the time understood, witness the brutal rules of 17th century quarantine, and discover why this ancient nightmare feels uncomfortably familiar today. In the spring of 1665, London was the largest and busiest city in England. It was a place of high fashion, crowded markets, and new ideas. But in a poor neighborhood just outside the city walls called St. Giles-in-the-Fields, something invisible was moving through the shadows. It started as a whisper, a sudden fever that felt like fire, and a headache that wouldn't go away. Then came the Buboes. These were painful, hard swellings about the size of an apple that appeared under the arms or in the groin. In the 17th century, if you saw these Buboes appear on your body, you knew you had only a few days left to live. Imagine waking up to the sound of a hammer hitting wood. "Lord, have mercy on us!" You try to open your front door, but it is locked from the outside. When you look out the window, you see a giant red cross painted on your door. You have been placed under quarantine. This means you are forced to stay in one place to stop a disease from moving. In 1665, this meant you were shut up, trapped inside with your dying family, waiting for the dead cart to pass by your window at midnight. This was the start of the Great Plague. Why did London fall so easily to this sickness? In 1665, about 450,000 people lived in the city in very crowded conditions. It was a tinderbox for disease. London was incredibly dirty. There were no trash cans or sewers like we have today. People threw food scraps, animal guts, and human waste directly into the muddy streets. When the summer became unusually hot, the city began to smell terrible. This brings us to a word you'll hear a lot in history: miasma. At the time, even the best doctors believed in the theory of miasma. This was the belief that diseases were caused by bad air or foul smells rising from the filth. They thought if you could smell something gross, you were breathing in the sickness. But the real killer was much smaller, and it wasn't the air. It was a bacteria called Yersinia pestis. This tiny germ lived inside fleas, and those fleas lived on the fur of black rats. Because London was so filthy, there were millions of rats. When the rats began to die from the plague, the fleas needed a new meal, so they jumped onto humans. One bite was all it took. By June, the secret was out. The death toll was rising, and panic took over the city. Anyone with money did the only thing they could: they ran. King Charles II and his court fled to the city of Oxford. The wealthy merchants followed in their carriages, piled high with belongings. They left behind a city of the poor, who had no money to escape and were often blocked from entering other towns. One famous man who chose to stay was Samuel Pepys. He was a government official who kept a daily diary. He wrote about how the busy streets were becoming silent and how the only constant sound was the ringing of church bells for funerals. It felt as if the city was simply waiting to die. If you walked down a street during the height of the outbreak, you might see the most famous symbol of the era, the plague doctor. He wore a heavy leather cloak and a mask with a long bird-like beak. That beak was stuffed with sweet-smelling herbs like lavender and mint. Because of the Miasma Theory, people believed these smells would filter the bad air. Ironically, while the herbs did nothing, the leather suit actually protected the doctors from flea bites, even though they didn't know it. To keep track of the horror, the city published the Bills of Mortality. These were weekly reports that listed exactly how many people died. By September, these reports were terrifying. Official counts reached over 7,000 deaths in a single week. The graveyards were completely full. This led to the creation of plague pits. These were massive, deep trenches in the ground, where hundreds of bodies were buried together at once. One famous pit at Aldgate was 40 feet long and 20 feet deep. "Bring out your dead!" At night, workers tipped bodies into these pits by torchlight to hide the site from the public. Grass actually started to grow in the middle of the main streets because so few people were left to walk on them. The plague finally began to slow down as the winter of 1665 arrived. The freezing cold killed off the fleas and slowed the bacteria. By early 1666, the king and the wealthy began to return. However, London faced one last disaster. In September 1666, the Great Fire of London broke out. It burned for 4 days and destroyed 13,000 houses. For a long time, people believed the fire cured the plague by burning away the germs. We now know the plague was already mostly gone, but the fire did do one helpful thing. It destroyed the filthy wooden slums where the rats thrived. When London was rebuilt, the laws changed. Houses had to be built with brick and stone, and streets were made wider. This made it much harder for disease to take over again. In just over 1 year, the Great Plague killed an estimated 100,000 people, roughly a quarter of London's population. It was a year of total darkness, but it changed the world. It forced us to rethink how we build cities and how we handle public health. Does any of this sound familiar? The locked doors, the guarded borders, the fear of the very air we breathe. History has a way of feeling like ancient history until it doesn't. Sometimes I wish I could step back and experience this city as it once was, just for a single day, to feel the eerie silence of those empty cobblestone streets and hear the distant tolling of the bells. For now, I guess, this AI reconstruction is as close as I can come to that dream. If there's another lost city, an ancient disaster, or a moment in history you'd like to see brought back to life, let me know in the comments. I'd love to keep building this journey into the past with you. If you enjoyed this trip back to 1665, please do hit the like button and subscribe for more. Again, thank you so much for watching.